The autumn air hung crisp and cool around Westfield Academy as Marcus and Michael Hudson stepped through the ornate iron gates for their first day. The prestigious private school stood like a fortress of privilege against the morning sky, its brick walls and stately columns projecting an aura of tradition and exclusivity that seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." The 14-year-old twins moved in perfect synchronicity, their matching navy blue uniforms pressed to perfection, their backpacks slung identically over strong shoulders, and their expressions carefully neutral despite the weight of dozens of curious and some openly hostile stares that tracked their movement across the immaculately maintained courtyard. They had prepared for this moment, mentally rehearsing what it would feel like to be among the first black students admitted to Westfield's hallowed halls. But the reality hit harder than imagination could have prepared them for. The whispers followed them like shadows, just loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to be denied, if challenged. Did they get lost? One voice sneered from a cluster of boys lounging against a stone pillar. "Must be some kind of diversity scholarship," another replied with a dismissive laugh that rippled through his group of friends. Marcus caught his brother's eye, a silent communication passing between them that spoke volumes in the language only twins can understand. "Keep moving. Don't react." This was expected. Their mother, Dr. Amara Hudson, a renowned neurosurgeon who had fought her own battles in the overwhelmingly white and male-dominated surgical world, had prepared them with unflinching honesty about what they might face. "They will test you," she had told them the night before, her voice steady as steel as she adjusted Marcus's tie one final time. "They will try to make you feel small, make you doubt that you've earned your place. But remember who you are, remember what you can do, and most importantly, remember when to show it." What the privileged students of Westfield couldn't see as they appraised the newcomers with disdain was that beneath the crisp uniforms and calm exteriors, Marcus and Michael Hudson were anything but defenseless. For 8 years, they had trained in karate under the watchful eye of Sensei Takahashi, a 7th-degree black belt whose dojo had become their second home. They had risen through the ranks together, pushing each other to perfect every kata, every strike, every defensive maneuver until the art became as natural to them as breathing. Just 3 months ago, they had earned their black belts, standing side by side as Sensei Takahashi presented them with the coveted belts that represented not just skill, but discipline, respect, and control, especially control. "The strongest warrior knows when not to fight," Sensei would remind them during every session, his wise eyes seeing past their youthful eagerness. True strength lies in restraint. That restraint was being tested now as they navigated through the sea of privilege and prejudice that was Westfield Academy on this crisp September morning. They reached the main entrance, a massive wooden door that seemed to groan with the weight of centuries as they pulled it open, stepping from the cool air into the climate-controlled interior that smelled of polish, old books, and entitlement. Inside, the hallway stretched before them, lined with gleaming lockers and display cases, showcasing the school's proud history. Students gathered in small groups, their conversations dropping to whispers as the twins passed. Some stares were simply curious, others calculatingly cold. But what caught Marcus's attention immediately was a particular group stationed near the center of the hallway. 5 boys, each with the unmistakable air of those who had never been told no in their lives, watched the twins approach with predatory interest. At their center stood a tall, athletic boy with perfectly styled blonde hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to assess and dismiss them in the same moment. Even without introduction, Marcus recognized the look of a self-appointed king surveying what he considered his domain. This, he was certain, was trouble waiting to happen. "New meet at 3 o'clock, the blonde boy announced loudly, making no effort to lower his voice as the twins approached. "I don't remember ordering a 2-for-1 special." His friends erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the polished floors and mahogany paneling. Michael's stride faltered almost imperceptibly, but Marcus felt the slight hesitation through their twin connection. He nudged his brother subtly, a silent reminder of their mother's words and their sensei's teachings. They continued walking, eyes forward, expressions unchanged as they passed the group. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the blond boy called after them, his voice hardening with irritation at being ignored. "Didn't your parents teach you manners? Or maybe they were too busy cleaning somebody's house?" The comment was like a match struck in a room full of gasoline, designed specifically to provoke a reaction. Marcus felt heat rise to his face, a familiar tension building in his muscles that he recognized from countless sparring matches. The instinct to turn, to respond, to defend was powerful, but stronger still was his discipline. "Not worth it," Michael murmured, so quietly that only his twin could hear him. "Not today." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. They continued walking, navigating through the hallways according to the map they'd studied meticulously the night before, finding their assigned lockers and beginning to organize their books with methodical precision. They could still feel the stares, still hear the whispers, but they remained focused on the task at hand. This was just the first day, just the first encounter. They knew from experience that responding now would only escalate the situation. Control was their advantage, patience their strategy. As they arranged their textbooks, a small group of students approached them. 3 boys and 2 girls, who seemed to move with the same tense caution one might use when approaching wild animals. "You're the Hudson twins, right?" one of the girls asked, her voice friendly but cautious. "I'm Sophia. This is Aiden, Tyler, Emma, and Luis. We're part of the Student Welcome Committee." The twins turned simultaneously, a habit that often unnerved people. They assessed the group quickly, noting the genuine, if somewhat nervous, smiles. "I'm Marcus," said Marcus with a slight nod. "And I'm Michael," his brother added. "Nice to meet you. We thought you might want a quick tour before first period," Aiden offered, adjusting his glasses. "Westfield can be a bit overwhelming at first. And we wanted to say, well, not everyone here is like Connor and his crew," Emma added, glancing nervously over her shoulder toward the group they'd passed earlier. "Connor Wells," Luis explained in a low voice. "His father is on the school board, his grandfather's name is on the science building, and he thinks that makes him owner of the place. And the people in it," Tyler added with a grimace. Marcus and Michael exchanged another look. So the blond boy had a name, Connor Wells. It was useful information, though neither twin acknowledged its significance outwardly. "A tour would be great," Marcus said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you." As they followed their self-appointed guides through the labyrinthine hallways of Westfield Academy, both twins remained acutely aware that their first encounter with Connor Wells was unlikely to be their last. The challenge had been issued, the line drawn. But unlike what Connor clearly expected, the Hudson twins weren't going to be easy targets. They had faced prejudice before, had dealt with bullies and bigots. What Connor and his friends didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly know, was that they weren't just dealing with 2 new black students in a predominantly white school. They were dealing with disciplined martial artists who had spent years learning the art of combat and, more importantly, the wisdom of knowing when to use it. The first week at Westfield unfolded much as the twins had anticipated. They attended their classes, answered questions when called upon, and maintained their calm, measured demeanor despite the increasing hostility from Connor Wells and his entourage. The group, which they learned consisted of Connor, his right-hand man Alex Thompson, and 3 other loyal followers, David Chen, Ethan Morris, and Patrick Collins, seemed to make it their personal mission to provoke a reaction from the newcomers. It started with small things, a shoulder check in the hallway followed by an insincere, "Sorry, didn't see you there," books knocked from their hands with feigned innocence, seats suddenly taken in the cafeteria just as they approached. The twins weathered each incident with stoic dignity, never giving Connor the satisfaction of seeing them rattled. But as the days passed, the harassment grew bolder, the comments louder, more public, more explicitly racist. "Hey, Hudsons!" Connor called across the crowded cafeteria on Thursday, his voice carrying over the din of lunchtime conversation. "I heard you live in Oakwood Heights. Isn't that where they're building that new country club? Oh, wait, you wouldn't know about that, would you? It's members only." The laughter that followed made Marcus's hand tighten around his water bottle until the plastic crackled in protest. Michael, sensing his brother's tension, spoke without looking up from his lunch. 3 more hours, then we have training." The reminder of their after-school session at the dojo helped Marcus center himself. Every day after school, they would change out of their Westfield uniforms and head straight to Sensei Takahashi's dojo for 2 hours of intensive training. It was their sanctuary, the place where they could shed the weight of their school day experiences and reconnect with their strengths. Sensei had noticed the change in them immediately on Monday, his perceptive eyes missing nothing about his longtime students. "Your spirits are troubled," he had observed as they moved through their warm-up katas with less than their usual precision. "New school," Michael had offered by way of explanation. Sensei had nodded thoughtfully. "The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire," he had told them. "Remember that there is no situation from which you cannot learn, no challenge that cannot make you stronger." His words had become their mantra throughout the week, a reminder that even this experience, as uncomfortable and infuriating as it was, could serve to strengthen them if they maintained their discipline and focus. But by Friday, even that mantra was being tested beyond its limits. Connor, apparently frustrated by their continued non-reaction to his provocations, decided to escalate. As the twins were retrieving books from their lockers between classes, Connor and his entire group surrounded them in a loose semicircle that effectively blocked their exit. "You know what I can't figure out?" Connor said, leaning casually against a neighboring locker. "How you two got in here in the first place. Westfield has standards." "Must be that diversity quota," Alex suggested with a smirk. "School needs to look good for the brochures, right? Or maybe they're just the help," David added. "Could use some people to clean the trophies, take out the trash." Marcus closed his locker with controlled precision, turning to face Connor directly for the first time. His expression remained neutral, but there was a new intensity in his dark eyes that might have warned someone more perceptive that they were treading on dangerous ground. "We earned our place here," he said simply, his voice level. "Just like anyone else." Connor's eyes narrowed at the direct response. He straightened from his lounging position, taking a step closer until he was barely a foot away from Marcus. He was several inches taller, a fact he emphasized by looking down his nose at the younger boy. "Did you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a more menacing register. "Or did Mommy and Daddy pull some strings, play the race card? Because let me tell you something, Hudson. People like you don't belong at Westfield. Never have, never will." The bell rang for the next class, but no one in the tense standoff moved. Students passing by slowed to watch, sensing the confrontation brewing. Michael moved to stand beside his brother, shoulder to shoulder, a united front. "We have class," he said calmly. "You should move." Connor's expression darkened at what he perceived as a command. "Or what?" he challenged, moving even closer. "What exactly do you think you're going to do about it, Hudson?" For a moment, time seemed to slow. Marcus felt the familiar calm that always preceded action in the dojo, that perfect clarity where options presented themselves with crystal precision. He could easily remove Connor from his path with a dozen different techniques, could demonstrate exactly what he was capable of doing about it. One quick move, and Connor would be on the floor, his entitlement shattered along with his assumption of physical superiority. But then Sensei's voice echoed in his mind. "The mark of a true warrior is not how many fights he wins, but how many he avoids." "Nothing," Marcus said finally, his voice steady. "We're going to do nothing, Because unlike you, we actually care about why we're here." The twins shouldered past the group with deliberate movements that were neither aggressive nor submissive, leaving Connor momentarily stunned by their controlled response to his direct challenge. As they walked away, they could hear Connor's voice, louder now, calling after them. "This isn't over, Hudsons, not by a long shot." Michael glanced at his brother as they continued walking. "He's not going to stop," he observed quietly. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "I know, but we will not be the ones to throw the first punch." By the time they arrived at the dojo that afternoon, both twins were vibrating with suppressed tension. Sensei Takahashi took one look at them and immediately set them to sparring with his most advanced adult students, recognizing their need to release the pressure that had been building all week. They fought with controlled fury, their movements precise and powerful, their focus absolute. By the end of the session, they were exhausted but centered. The knot of anger and frustration finally loosened. As they bowed to Sensei after class, he approached them with his quiet, measured stride. "Better," he said simply, but still troubled. The twins exchanged a glance before Marcus spoke. "We're facing a challenge at school, Sensei. Someone who seems determined to provoke us into fighting." Sensei nodded, unsurprised. "And you are resisting this provocation?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, Sensei," Michael confirmed, "but it's becoming difficult." Sensei's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes softened slightly. "The way of karate is not easy. It demands that we master ourselves before we attempt to engage with others. You have learned the physical techniques well, but now you face the true test of your training." He paused, studying them both intently. "Tell me, what is the first principle of karate-do?" The twins answered in unison, the response ingrained after years of training. "Karate begins and ends with respect." "Exactly," Sensei nodded. "Respect for others, yes, but first, respect for oneself. To allow another to provoke you into losing control is to surrender your self-respect to them. This is something a true karateka never does." He placed a hand on each of their shoulders, his touch light but grounding. "I cannot tell you what path to take. Each warrior must make his own decisions when faced with conflict. But remember this, whatever action you take should come from a place of center, not from reaction. This is the difference between the master and the student." The twins absorbed his words, feeling their wisdom settle into their bones. As they prepared to leave, Sensei added one final thought. "Sometimes, the most powerful demonstration of strength is showing restraint when everyone expects violence. But sometimes, the most necessary demonstration of strength is standing firmly against those who mistake restraint for weakness." Those words would echo in their minds throughout the weekend as they prepared for the week ahead, both twins knowing instinctively that the situation at Westfield was building towards some kind of climax. They spent Saturday and Sunday training intensively, running through katas in their backyard while their mother watched from the kitchen window, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. Sunday evening, as they sat down to dinner, Dr. Hudson finally addressed what she had been observing. "Something's happening at school," she said directly, placing her fork down beside her plate. "I can see it in the way you're training, in how quiet you've both been. Tell me." The twins shared a look before recounting the week's events, detailing Connor's escalating harassment and their efforts to maintain their composure in the face of his provocations. Dr. Hudson listened without interruption, her surgeon's focus evident in the way she absorbed every detail. When they finished, she was silent for a long moment, her hands folded in front of her. "You know," she finally said, "when I decided to become a neurosurgeon, my advisor told me I was making a mistake. He said that as a black woman, I would face 3 times the resistance, 3 times the scrutiny, and receive a third of the credit for my successes." Her dark eyes, so like her son's, hardened with the memory. He wasn't entirely wrong, but what he failed to understand was that I wasn't asking for his permission or his approval. I was informing him of my decision. She reached across the table, taking one of each twin's hands in her own. I raised you both to never back down from a challenge, to never let anyone define your worth or your place in this world. But I also raised you to be smart about how you fight your battles. Her grip tightened slightly. There will always be Connor Welleses in this world. People who believe their privilege gives them the right to diminish others. How you respond to them will define you far more than how they treat you. She released their hands, sitting back in her chair. I trust you both to make the right decisions. You have my strength and your father's conscience. Use them both. As they cleared the dinner dishes together, Marcus voiced the question that had been forming in his mind. Mom, why did you send us to Westfield? You must have known what it would be like. Dr. Hudson handed him a plate to dry, her movements efficient and precise, just like when she wielded a scalpel. Because Westfield opens doors, provides connections and opportunities that will serve you throughout your lives, she said matter-of-factly. And because someday, when you're successful men changing the world in whatever field you choose, I want it to be absolutely clear to everyone that you belong there all along. She paused, a small, fierce smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And maybe, just maybe, because the next black children who walk through those gates will find it a little easier because you were there first, standing your ground without apology. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. The twins, dressed in their uniforms, ate breakfast in companionable silence and drove to school with their mother, who had rearranged her surgery schedule to drop them off personally. As she pulled up to the gates, she turned to look at them both, her expression serious. Remember who you are, she said simply. They nodded, gathered their bags, and stepped out into the morning air, watching as her car disappeared around the corner. Together they walked through the gates of Westfield Academy, shoulders back, heads high, prepared for whatever the day might bring. What they weren't prepared for was the silence that greeted them as they entered the main hallway. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, eyes turned to stare, and a path seemed to clear automatically before them as they made their way to their lockers. The reason became apparent as they approached. Their lockers had been defaced, crude images and slurs spray-painted across the metal in vivid red paint that dripped like blood down the surfaces. The racial epithets were painful to see, but what made Marcus's blood truly run cold was the image. Crude stick figures hanging from a tree with the words, "Go home or else," scrawled beneath. He heard Michael's sharp intake of breath beside him, felt the sudden tension radiate from his twin's body. Around them, students watched with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and, from some, poorly concealed amusement. Teachers passing by slowed, then quickened their pace, unwilling to be the ones to address what was happening. And there, at the end of the hallway, stood Connor and his group, watching with undisguised satisfaction. Connor's lips curved in a triumphant smirk that said more clearly than words, "What are you going to do about it now?" Before the twins could react, Principal Hammond appeared, his face flushed with what appeared to be genuine anger as he took in the scene. "Who is responsible for this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the hushed silence of the hallway. No one spoke. Connor's smirk remained firmly in place, his confidence in his immunity evident in his relaxed posture. Hammond's gaze swept the gathered students before returning to Marcus and Michael. "I am deeply sorry you have to see this," he said, his tone sincere but uncomfortable. "Please know that this behavior does not reflect the values of Westfield Academy. We will conduct a full investigation, and whoever is responsible will face serious consequences." But even as he spoke, his eyes slid past them to where Connor stood, and something in his expression changed, hardened, then softened in resignation. It was subtle, but both twins caught it. The momentary recognition, the brief calculation, and then the decision to look away. In that instant, they understood that justice within the walls of Westfield would always be compromised, always blunted by the realities of power, privilege, and donation checks signed by parents with buildings named after them. "The custodial staff will clean this immediately," Hammond continued, already gesturing for assistance. "In the meantime, I'll have temporary lockers assigned to you both. Why don't you come to my office and we can discuss this incident further?" As he led them away, Marcus glanced back over his shoulder, meeting Connor's gaze directly. The older boy's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who had pushed things to the edge and still expected to walk away unscathed. But something in Marcus's steady gaze must have unnerved him, because the smirk faltered just for a moment, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty before he recovered his composure. "Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story about Marcus and Michael standing strong against prejudice and bullying, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments if you've ever had to stay disciplined in the face of unfair treatment, or tell us about a time when your hidden strengths surprised others. And if this story resonates with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more powerful narratives about courage, identity, and standing up for what's right. I promise tomorrow's story about a young immigrant who changed her entire community will be just as moving. Now let's get back to see how the Hudson twins handle this escalating situation. The meeting in Hammond's office was brief and unsatisfying. The principal spoke at length about Westfield's commitment to diversity and inclusion, about how this incident was not representative of the school community, about how seriously they were taking the matter. But when Marcus directly asked what would happen if Connor Wells was found to be responsible, Hammond's response was tellingly evasive. "We deal with all disciplinary matters according to school policy," he said, his eyes not quite meeting theirs. "Taking into account the specific circumstances, the student's record, and what we believe will be the most educational outcome for all involved. In other words, nothing meaningful would happen to Connor Wells, son of board member Richard Wells, grandson of donor extraordinaire Harold Wells, whose family money had built the science wing and funded the lacrosse field." The twins left the office with temporary locker assignments and a growing certainty that the system within Westfield's walls would never protect them. They would need to protect themselves. That afternoon in the dojo, they trained with a focus and intensity that caught even Sensei Takahashi's attention. After the other students had left, he called them to sit with him for tea, a rare invitation that signaled his recognition of their troubled spirits. "Something has changed," he observed, pouring the steaming green tea with practiced precision. "Tell me." They recounted the morning's events, describing the defaced lockers, the principal's response, and their growing certainty that the school administration would not address the issue with the seriousness it deserved. Sensei listened without interruption, his weathered face impassive, though a subtle tightening around his eyes betrayed his anger at what they described. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment, sipping his tea thoughtfully. "In feudal Japan," he finally said, "there was a concept known as meiyo, which translates roughly to honor or dignity. A samurai would defend his meiyo at all costs, because without it he was nothing." He set his cup down with deliberate care. "But what many Westerners misunderstand is that meiyo was not just about fighting. It was about living with integrity, about making choices that reflect one's true character, especially, when those choices are difficult." He looked at each twin in turn, his gaze penetrating. "You stand now at a crossroads. How you respond to this provocation will reveal much about who you are and who you will become. If you choose to fight, do so not from anger, but from a place of clarity and purpose. If you choose restraint, let it be because you have truly mastered yourselves, not because you fear the consequences." He poured them each more tea, the steam rising between them like the questions that hung in the air. "Whatever you decide," he continued, "remember that true victory comes not from defeating an opponent, but from remaining true to your own principles. This is the highest form of meiyo." The next day, the twins arrived at school prepared for anything. The news of the defaced lockers had spread throughout the student body, creating a tension that was almost palpable as they walked the hallways. Some students avoided their gaze entirely. Others watched them with a new wariness, as if expecting them to explode at any moment. A few, like Sophia and her friends from the Welcome Committee, approached them with genuine concern and support, condemning what had happened and offering their friendship in a way that felt both well-intentioned and somehow inadequate in the face of what they were experiencing. Connor and his group, emboldened by the lack of immediate consequences, were more overt than ever in their harassment. They no longer bothered with the pretense of accidental encounters, instead deliberately seeking out opportunities to confront the twins. "You're still here," Connor observed loudly as they entered the cafeteria at lunch. "Didn't get the message, huh? Maybe we need to spell it out more clearly next time." The twins collected their lunch trays without acknowledging him, but as they turned to find seats, Alex and Ethan moved to block their path. "Connor's talking to you," Alex said, his voice low but aggressive. The polite thing would be to answer. Marcus looked directly at Connor, who remained seated at his table, watching the interaction with that same smirk that had become all too familiar. "We have nothing to say to him," Marcus replied calmly, "and he has nothing to say that we need to hear." He made to step around Alex, but the older boy shifted to remain in his path. "See, that's your problem right there," Ethan interjected, moving closer. "You think you're too good to even talk to us, coming in here with your attitude, thinking you own the place after 5 minutes." Michael's voice was quiet but firm. "We just want to eat our lunch. Move." "Or what?" Alex challenged, stepping even closer until he was directly in Michael's personal space. "What exactly are you going to do, Hudson?" For a moment, the cafeteria seemed to hold its collective breath. Students at nearby tables fell silent, watching the confrontation with nervous anticipation. Michael remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, but Marcus could sense the tightly controlled energy in his brother's body, the readiness that came from years of training. In a matter of milliseconds, Michael could have Alex on the ground, could demonstrate exactly what he was capable of doing. But instead, he simply looked Alex directly in the eyes and said, with perfect calm, "Nothing today." The emphasis on the final word was subtle but unmistakable, a promise rather than a threat. Before Alex could respond, a teacher approached, finally noticing the obvious confrontation. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" she asked, her tone making it clear that there had better not be. "No problem, Ms. Carlton," Connor called from his table, his voice dripping with false innocence. "Just a little misunderstanding. Right, guys?" Alex hesitated, then stepped back with visible reluctance. "Right. No problem." The twins proceeded to an empty table, aware of the eyes that followed them, aware too of the whispered conversations that their restraint had sparked. They ate in silence, but their thoughts were in perfect alignment. This situation was accelerating toward a breaking point, and when it came, they would be ready. The breaking point arrived the next day, earlier than either of them had anticipated. They had just entered the east wing of the school, heading toward their physics class, when they rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with Connor and his entire group. From the way they were positioned in the otherwise empty hallway, it was clear this was no accidental meeting. "Well, look who it is," Connor said, pushing off from the wall where he'd been leaning. "The Hudson twins, Westfield's very own diversity initiative." His friends chuckled on cue, spreading out slightly to form a loose semicircle around the twins. Marcus did a quick assessment of the situation. 5 of them, 2 of us. Empty hallway, no witnesses. Classes in session, no teachers likely to pass by. This was deliberate. They had chosen their moment carefully. "We're going to be late for class," Michael said evenly, though they both knew that wasn't really the issue at hand. Connor's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. "That's cute. You still think this is about going to class, being good students. Let me make something very clear. You don't belong here. You never will, and we're done pretending otherwise." He took a step closer, his body language unmistakably aggressive now. "Yesterday in the cafeteria, you had an audience. Teachers, students, witnesses. That protected you, but right now it's just us. So I'll ask you again, what are you going to do? The calculation was clear in Connor's eyes. He had chosen this isolated location because he believed it gave him the advantage, allowed him to escalate without interference. What he didn't realize was that he had actually given the advantage to Marcus and Michael, removing the very constraints that had been keeping them in check. "One last chance," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying a new note of finality. "Walk away, all of you. This doesn't have to happen." Connor's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected response, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features before his arrogance reasserted itself. "Are you threatening me, Hudson?" he demanded, stepping even closer until he was directly in Marcus's face. "In my school? You really think that's going to work out well for you?" Marcus didn't flinch, didn't back away, didn't show any reaction at all to Connor's proximity. He simply looked the older boy directly in the eyes and said, with perfect clarity, "This is your last warning. We don't want to fight you. But if you force this, you will regret it." For the briefest moment, something like doubt flashed in Connor's eyes. There was something in Marcus's tone, something in the absolute stillness of both twins, that triggered a warning signal in some primitive part of his brain. But he had committed too fully, had an audience of his own in his friends, had too much pride invested in this confrontation to back down now. Big words from such a little... He didn't finish the sentence. His hand had shot out to shove Marcus's shoulder, a familiar pattern of escalation that had worked for him countless times before with other targets. But this time, his hand never reached its destination. With a movement too quick for Connor to follow, Marcus deflected the push, stepping slightly to the side, while simultaneously gripping Connor's extended wrist and applying precise pressure to the radial nerve. The result was immediate. Connor gasped in pain, his knees buckling as he found himself suddenly off balance and vulnerable. Marcus released him just as quickly, stepping back into a neutral stance as Connor stumbled, nearly falling before catching himself against the wall. The entire interaction had taken less than 2 seconds. The hallway fell completely silent, 4 pairs of eyes widening in shock at what they had just witnessed. Connor himself seemed unable to process what had happened, staring at Marcus with a mixture of disbelief and dawning alarm. "What the hell was that?" Alex finally broke the silence, his voice higher than usual with surprise. "Like I said," Marcus replied calmly, "we don't want to fight, but we can. And we will if you make us." The declaration hung in the air for a moment, its implications slowly sinking in. Then Connor, his face flushing crimson with humiliation and rage, launched himself at Marcus with a wild, uncoordinated swing. "You're dead." The twins moved in perfect synchronization, their years of training evident in every controlled movement. Marcus sidestepped Connor's charge with minimal effort, while Michael simultaneously dealt with Alex and Ethan, who had decided to join the fray. What followed was not a fight so much as a demonstration, a controlled, precise application of technique against opponents who quickly discovered they were hopelessly outmatched. Connor found himself on the floor within seconds, his arm immobilized in a joint lock that sent waves of pain shooting through his shoulder whenever he attempted to struggle. Alex and Ethan fared no better, one pinned against the wall in a hold that rendered him completely immobile, the other flat on his back, the wind knocked out of him from a perfectly executed sweep. David and Patrick, seeing how quickly their friends had been neutralized, hesitated, their previous confidence evaporating in the face of this unexpected reversal. "Let me go," Connor demanded, his voice strained with pain and fury. "I'll have you expelled for this." Marcus maintained the hold with minimal effort, his voice remaining calm. "We didn't start this. We warned you repeatedly to leave us alone. You chose not to listen. You don't know who you're messing with," Connor threatened, though the effect was somewhat undermined by his current position. "My father—" "We know exactly who your father is," Michael interrupted, maintaining his own hold on Ethan with the same controlled precision. Just like we know that Principal Hammond won't do anything meaningful about your behavior because of who your father is. That's why you thought you could get away with everything. The harassment, the vandalism, the threats. Connor's eyes widened slightly at the direct accusation, a momentary flash of guilt confirming their suspicions before his expression hardened again. "You can't prove anything," he spat, "and it doesn't matter anyway. No one's going to take your word over mine." Marcus increased the pressure slightly, just enough to ensure Connor's full attention. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. We held back until now out of respect, for ourselves, for the school, for the opportunity we have here. Not out of fear, never out of fear." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure that only Connor could hear his next words. "What you're experiencing right now is about 10% of what we're capable of. Think about that. Really think about it." With that, he released the hold and stepped back, allowing Connor to scramble to his feet. Michael similarly released Ethan, moving to stand beside his brother, both of them dropping naturally into defensive stances that would be recognizable to anyone with even passing familiarity with martial arts. Connor, rubbing his shoulder, stared at them with new eyes, seeing them truly for the first time. "This ends now," Marcus stated, his voice carrying a weight and authority that seemed to fill the empty hallway. "You leave us alone, completely alone. No more accidental encounters, no more comments, no more pranks. We came to Westfield to learn, and that's what we're going to do. If you interfere with that again, what happened today will seem like a warm-up. Do we understand each other?" The silence that followed was heavy with the seismic shift that had just occurred in the power dynamics of Westfield Academy. Connor, still massaging his shoulder, looked from one twin to the other, a series of emotions crossing his face in rapid succession. Anger, humiliation, fear, and finally something like grudging respect. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked finally, the question seemingly escaping before he could stop himself. "We've been training in karate since we were 6, Michael answered, his stance relaxing slightly, though his alertness remained evident. "We're black belts." This revelation rippled through the small group, resulting in exchanged glances that conveyed a mixture of surprise and a dawning realization of just how badly they had miscalculated the situation. "Black belts," Alex repeated, the color finally returning to his face as he straightened his uniform. "You might have mentioned that before things got physical. Would it have made a difference?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Or would you have just found some other way to make us feel unwelcome?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its accuracy. None of the 5 boys seemed eager to answer it directly. "Look," Connor finally said, straightening to his full height and making a visible effort to recover some dignity. "You made your point. We'll back off." It wasn't quite an apology, wasn't anywhere close to one, in fact, but it was an acknowledgement of the new reality. The twins nodded in unison, accepting the concession for what it was. "Then we're done here," Marcus concluded. The standoff might have ended there, a tentative truce established in the aftermath of their confrontation, had it not been for the sound of footsteps approaching from around the corner. All 7 boys turned to see Vice Principal Keller stride into view, his expression shifting rapidly from distracted preoccupation to sharp focus as he took in the scene before him. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping across the group with practiced suspicion. "Why aren't you all in class?" There was a moment of collective hesitation, a silent calculation of options and potential consequences. Connor straightened his blazer, a familiar confidence returning to his posture as he assessed the opportunity presented by Keller's arrival. The twins tensed slightly, preparing for the inevitable accusation, the distorted version of events that would cast them as the aggressors. But then Connor surprised them. "Just a misunderstanding, Mr. Keller," he said smoothly. "We were having a spirited debate about the basketball team's chances this season. Lost track of time." Keller's eyebrows rose skeptically. "A debate that required all of you to be out of class?" "That's my fault, sir," Connor continued, his charm offensive in full deployment now. "I asked the guys to help me show the Hudsons around, make them feel welcome, you know, since they're new, but we got distracted talking about sports." The lie was so transparent, so at odds with the reality of the past 2 weeks, that Marcus and Michael could only stare in amazement at Connor's sheer audacity. But Keller, either choosing to accept the explanation or simply not invested enough to probe deeper, merely sighed in exasperation. "All of you get to class now. I don't want to see any of you in the hallway again during period time today." "Understood." A chorus of "yes, sir" followed, and the group dispersed with remarkable speed, Connor and his friends heading in one direction, the twins in another. As they walked away, Marcus caught Connor glancing back, a new wariness in his expression that hadn't been there before. It wasn't friendship, wasn't even respect exactly, but it was at least recognition that the Hudson twins were not who he had assumed them to be, not what he had expected. And for now, that would have to be enough. The news spread through Westfield Academy with the speed and precision of a controlled burn, whispers and text messages creating an information wildfire that was impossible to contain. By lunchtime, the story of the confrontation had reached mythic proportions, with some versions claiming the twins had put the entire group in the hospital, others suggesting they were Olympic-level martial artists in disguise. The reality that they had neutralized the threat with minimal force and maximum control was impressive enough without embellishment. But high school narratives rarely concern themselves with accuracy when sensation is available. The twins entered the cafeteria to find a distinctly altered atmosphere. Conversations paused as they passed, but the quality of the silence was different now, tinged with curiosity and reassessment rather than judgment or derision. The hostile stares had been replaced by considering looks, even occasional nods of acknowledgement. And when they approached a table, there was no shortage of students willing to make room for them. "Is it true?" Sophia asked as soon as they sat down, her eyes wide with excitement. "Did you really take down Connor and his whole crew?" Marcus exchanged a glance with his brother, both of them uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "It's being exaggerated," Michael said finally. "There was a confrontation. We defended ourselves, that's all." "That's not all," Luis interjected, leaning forward across the table. "Connor Wells has been terrorizing people at this school for years. No one stands up to him, no one. And you guys just handled him like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Marcus corrected, his tone serious. "Fighting should always be the last resort, not something to celebrate. We spent years learning how to defend ourselves, but our sensei taught us that the best fight is the one you avoid entirely." "Well, philosophical or not, you're officially legends now," Emma informed them with a grin. "And I have to say, it couldn't have happened to a more deserving group of jerks." Across the cafeteria, Connor and his friends were conspicuously subdued, huddled together at their usual table but lacking the loud, performative confidence that typically characterized their presence. They studiously avoided looking in the twins' direction, focusing on their food with unusual intensity. The shift in dynamics was subtle but unmistakable, a realignment of the social order that would have far-reaching implications beyond this single day or incident. After school, as the twins were heading toward the gates where their mother would pick them up, they were surprised to see Connor leaning against a tree near the exit, apparently alone. He straightened as they approached, his expression unreadable. "Hudson!" he called, not specifying which twin he meant. "Got a minute?" The brothers shared a quick look of caution before approaching, maintaining enough distance to react if necessary. "What is it?" Marcus asked, his voice neutral. Connor glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot, then focused on them with uncharacteristic directness. "That thing you did to me in the hallway, that wrist lock or whatever. Where'd you learn that?" Of all the questions they might have expected, this wasn't even on the list. Michael answered cautiously, "Our dojo. Sensei Takahashi teaches traditional Shotokan karate." Connor nodded thoughtfully, seeming to process this information. And this, Sensei, he takes new students. The twins couldn't quite hide their surprise at the question. Are you serious? Marcus asked, studying Connor's face for signs of mockery or hidden agenda. But the older boy's expression remained earnest, if somewhat defensive. You know what? He said, a hint of his usual arrogance returning. Forget I asked. It was a stupid... He takes serious students, Michael interrupted, his tone measured. People who want to learn the art, not just how to fight. It's about discipline, respect, self-control. Connor's laugh was short and lacking its usual malice. Yeah, well, looked like you were doing plenty of fighting today. We were applying what we learned, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Connor was silent for a moment, considering this distinction. Then, with a slight shrug that failed to disguise his genuine interest, he asked, "Where is this dojo?" The twins exchanged another look, a silent conference passing between them. Finally, Marcus pulled out his phone. "Give me your number. I'll text you the address and the class schedule." The exchange that followed was brief and slightly awkward, neither side quite sure how to navigate this unexpected territory. As Connor turned to leave, Michael called after him. "Connor," he paused, looking back. "Sensei won't tolerate disrespect to anyone, for any reason. If that's going to be a problem for you, don't bother showing up." Connor's expression tightened momentarily, then relaxed into something like resignation. "Message received," he said, and walked away. As they watched him go, Marcus murmured, "Mom is not going to believe this." Michael's response was equally quiet. Neither is Sensei, but both twins recognized the potential significance of what had just occurred. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but perhaps the first tentative step towards something like understanding. And in the fraught environment of Westfield Academy, that was no small victory. When their mother's car pulled up minutes later, Dr. Hudson immediately sensed the change in her son's demeanor. "Something happened," she observed, her perceptive gaze moving from one to the other as they settled into their seats. "Good or bad?" "Both," Marcus answered after a moment's consideration. "Neither. It's complicated." Throughout the drive home, they recounted the day's events, the confrontation, its immediate aftermath, and the surprising conversation with Connor. Dr. Hudson listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful as she navigated the afternoon traffic with the same precision she brought to everything in her life. When they finished, she was silent for several blocks before finally responding. "You know," she said carefully, "when I sent you to Westfield, I expected challenges. I expected resistance. What I didn't expect was that you would end up teaching as much as you learned." Her eyes met theirs briefly in the rearview mirror. "I'm proud of you both, not because you won a fight, but because you understood when it was necessary and when it was finished. That kind of wisdom is rare, especially at your age." As they pulled into their driveway, she added one final thought. "Just be prepared. This isn't the end of the story. It's barely the beginning." Her words proved prophetic in ways none of them could have anticipated. The following day at school brought new tensions, new challenges, but of a different nature. Connor and his friends maintained their distance as promised, but the twins found themselves the reluctant focus of attention from much of the student body. Some sought their friendship with newfound enthusiasm. Others approached with thinly veiled curiosity about their martial arts training, and a few even came with stories of their own experiences with Connor's bullying, shared in hushed tones with a mixture of resentment and relief that someone had finally stood up to him. It was this last group that affected the twins most deeply. Students like Jeremy Chen, a sophomore whose science project had been deliberately sabotaged the previous year, or Amara Williams, whose natural hair had been the subject of cruel mockery for an entire semester, or Rafael Diaz, whose accent had been mimicked relentlessly until he became virtually silent in class. Story after story emerged, painting a picture of systematic intimidation that went far beyond typical high school power dynamics. What became increasingly clear was that the twins' stand against Connor had resonated beyond just their own situation, had tapped into a current of suppressed frustration and hope that ran through segments of the Westfield student body that had long felt marginalized or silenced. That afternoon, as they changed for karate practice, Marcus voiced what both of them had been thinking. "We opened something up," he said quietly, pulling his GI top over his head. "Something bigger than just us versus Connor." Michael nodded, already dressed and tying his black belt with practiced motions. "The question is, what do we do with that responsibility?" They had no immediate answer, but the question stayed with them throughout training, through the familiar rhythms of warm-up, kata practice, and sparring. Even Sensei Takahashi seemed to sense their preoccupation, watching them with thoughtful eyes as they moved through their exercises. After class, as they were helping clean the dojo as was their custom, he approached them with his characteristic quiet step. "You have brought the outside world into the dojo with you today," he observed, not unkindly. "Your bodies are here, but your minds are elsewhere." The twins paused in their tasks, facing their teacher with respectful attention. "We're sorry, Sensei," Marcus began, but Takahashi waved the apology away with a gentle gesture. "No need for apology. It is natural that the challenges you face in life will follow you to training. This is why we train, not to escape the world, but to better navigate it." He studied them for a moment, then added, "There is a principle in karate called kudo, the way of emptiness. It teaches us to empty ourselves of preconceptions, of ego, of fixed ideas about how things must be. Only then can we respond truly to what is before us." Michael considered this, then asked, "But how do we know when to empty ourselves and when to stand firm? There are times when principles matter, when justice matters." Sensei nodded, pleased by the question. "The emptiness I speak of is not the absence of conviction, but the absence of rigidity. Water is empty, formless, yet it can wear away stone with its persistence. It can flash to steam or freeze to ice, yet its essential nature remains unchanged." He looked at each twin in turn. "You have begun something at your school, a change, a movement perhaps. Now you must be like water, adaptable, flowing around obstacles rather than crashing against them, finding the path of least resistance to your goal." As they pondered his words, a sound at the dojo entrance caught their attention. All three turned to see Connor Wells, standing uncertainly in the doorway, dressed in casual clothes and looking distinctly out of place in the traditional setting. Sensei Takahashi's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise at the visitor. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone neutral but welcoming. Connor shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence notably absent. I'm Connor Wells. I was interested in learning about karate. The Hudsons said you might, if you're taking new students." His voice trailed off as he registered the formal atmosphere of the dojo, the discipline evident in every aspect of the space. Sensei Takahashi's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts as he regarded the newcomer. Then, with a slight nod to the twins that contained volumes of unspoken communication, he moved toward Connor with measured steps. "All who wish to learn are welcome here," he said simply. "But the path of Karate-do is not easy. It demands humility, respect, and the willingness to change oneself before attempting to change others." He stopped before Connor, studying him with penetrating eyes that seemed to look directly into the boy's character. "Are you prepared for such a journey, Connor Wells?" The question hung in the air, weighted with implications that went far beyond the immediate context of the dojo. Connor glanced past Sensei to where the twins stood watching, his expression a complex mixture of emotions, defiance, uncertainty, and something that might have been the first fragile shoots of genuine self-reflection. "I don't know," he admitted finally, the honesty clearly costing him effort. "But I'd like to try." Sensei Takahashi nodded once, decisively. "Then you may begin today. First, you will observe. Then, if you still wish to continue, we will discuss the terms of your training." He gestured to a bench along the wall. "Sit, watch, listen. The first lesson of karate is how to be present." As Connor moved to the indicated spot, looking both relieved and apprehensive, Sensei turned back to the twins with the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It seems the ripples of your actions have already reached further than you anticipated. This is the power and the responsibility of the true martial artist. Every action we take shapes the world around us in ways we cannot always foresee." With that profound observation, he returned to the center of the dojo, calling the entire class to attention for the final meditation period. The twins resumed their positions in the line of students, their minds calmer now, more centered, as they knelt on the mat and closed their eyes. Behind them, on the bench, Connor Wells watched in unaccustomed silence, witnessing a world so different from the one he had constructed for himself at Westfield, a world built on discipline rather than privilege, on earned respect rather than inherited status, on inclusion rather than exclusion. What would come of this unexpected convergence of paths remained to be seen, but as the twins opened their eyes at the conclusion of meditation, both felt a cautious optimism that had been absent that morning. The changes they had initiated might be just beginning, but they were changes with the potential to transform not just their own experience at Westfield, but perhaps the very culture of the institution itself. The following weeks at Westfield Academy were marked by subtle but significant shifts. Connor's presence at the dojo 3 times a week became a known fact among the student body, generating whispers and speculation that he endured with uncharacteristic stoicism. His group of friends fragmented slightly in his absence, with Alex maintaining a reduced but visible presence at Connor's side while the others drifted toward other social circles. The twins, for their part, found themselves navigating an unexpectedly complex, new social landscape. Their decisiveness in confronting Connor had earned them a certain status among their peers, but it came with expectations they weren't always comfortable fulfilling. Students approached them with grievances large and small, seeking intervention or protection, or simply validation of their own experiences. Marcus and Michael responded as best they could, listening more than acting, offering support without assuming the mantle of authority that some seemed eager to place on their shoulders. "We can't be responsible for fixing everything that's wrong with this place," Marcus observed one evening as they worked on homework in their shared bedroom. "And I'm not sure we should try. That feels like just another kind of power imbalance." Michael nodded thoughtfully, closing his physics textbook. "I've been thinking about what Sensei said about being like water. Maybe our role isn't to fight every battle directly, but to create channels for change, to flow naturally." This perspective guided their approach as they gradually, almost imperceptibly, began to influence the social dynamics of Westfield. They started a study group that actively included students from diverse backgrounds. They spoke up in class discussions about historical injustices and contemporary inequalities, not with confrontational energy, but with the quiet confidence of those who know their own minds. They made a point of acknowledging everyone they passed in the hallways, regardless of social status or background, breaking down the invisible barriers that had long segmented the student population. Small actions, ripple effects. At the dojo, Connor's integration into the karate program progressed with surprising smoothness. Initial awkwardness gave way to determined focus as he discovered that his natural athleticism served him well in the disciplined environment of martial arts training. He approached each new technique with the same intensity he had once directed toward maintaining his social dominance, but tempered now by the humility required of a beginner in a discipline where rank was earned rather than assumed. The twins maintained a polite distance at first, uncertain how to reconcile their new dojo relationship with their complicated history at school. But 3 weeks into Connor's training, an unexpected moment of connection altered the dynamic. During a partner exercise, Connor was struggling with a particular wrist lock. Ironically, the same technique Marcus had used on him during their confrontation. After several failed attempts, frustration evident in his flushed face and tense shoulders, he looked up to find Marcus standing beside him. "You're using too much force," Marcus said simply, demonstrating the correct grip on his own partner. "It's about leverage and timing, not strength. Like this." He adjusted Connor's fingers slightly, showing him the precise angle needed for the lock to engage effectively. "Try again." Connor's surprise at the offered assistance was evident, but he followed the instruction without comment. When the technique worked perfectly on his next attempt, a genuine smile of satisfaction, not the smirk they had come to know so well, transformed his features momentarily. "Thanks," he said, the word coming awkwardly, as if he had limited experience with its use. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging both the gratitude and the effort it had taken to express it, then returned to his own practice. It was a small moment, over in seconds, but it marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Not friendship, not yet, perhaps not ever, but a mutual recognition of shared humanity that had been absent in their previous interactions. The following week, as the twins entered their American history class, they were met with an unexpected announcement from Mr. Delaney, their usually reserved teacher. "Today," he began, adjusting his glasses with a nervous gesture, "we'll be discussing a topic that isn't explicitly covered in your textbook, but that I believe is essential to a complete understanding of our nation's development: the structural and systemic aspects of racial inequality throughout American history, from the colonial period to the present day." A ripple of surprise moved through the classroom. This was not the kind of subject that typically featured in Westfield's carefully sanitized curriculum, which tended to emphasize consensus narratives and uncomplicated patriotism over critical examination of historical injustices. Marcus and Michael exchanged a quick glance of interest, straightening in their seats as Mr. Delaney continued, outlining a lesson plan that would span several class periods and include primary source documents, statistical analyses, and contemporary perspectives on historical legacies. As the lecture progressed, it became clear that this was no cursory treatment of the subject. Delaney had prepared extensively, presenting a nuanced and academically rigorous examination of how racial hierarchies had been constructed, maintained, and sometimes challenged throughout American history. The twins participated actively in the discussion that followed, drawing on their own knowledge and experiences, while being careful not to position themselves as representatives of all black perspectives. What struck them most, however, was the engagement of their classmates. Questions were thoughtful, responses considered. Even students who clearly found some concepts challenging stayed with the discussion, wrestling with ideas rather than dismissing them outright. Connor, who shared this class with them, remained mostly silent but conspicuously attentive, his expression thoughtful as he took notes with uncharacteristic diligence. After class, as students were gathering their materials, Mr. Delaney approached the twins with an unreadable expression. "I wanted to thank you both," he said quietly. "Your presence in this school has catalyzed some overdue conversations among the faculty. This curriculum addition was approved just last week by the department." He hesitated, then added with careful precision, "Some of us have wanted to address these topics more directly for years, but there was always resistance from certain quarters. Your impact here has extended beyond what you might realize." Before either twin could respond to this unexpected revelation, Delaney moved away to answer another student's question, leaving them to process the implications of his words as they headed to their next class. "Did he just say what I think he said?" Michael murmured as they walked down the hallway. "That the school is changing its curriculum because of us?" Marcus shook his head, still processing. "Not because of us, exactly, but maybe our presence created an opportunity that some teachers were waiting for, the right moment to push for changes they already wanted." The conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Sophia, hurrying toward them with obvious excitement. "Have you guys heard?" she asked, slightly breathless. "The school board is forming a student-faculty committee on cultural inclusion and campus climate. They're taking applications for student representatives, and everyone's saying you two should definitely apply." She thrust a printed announcement toward them, her enthusiasm palpable. "This is huge! Westfield has never had anything like this before." The twins read the announcement with growing interest. The committee's stated purpose was to assess and improve the cultural climate of Westfield Academy, ensuring that all students feel valued, respected, and included in the school community. It would consist of 6 faculty members and 6 student representatives, with authority to recommend policy changes directly to the Board of Trustees. "This is unexpected," Marcus admitted, handing the paper back to Sophia. "But interesting, very interesting. You'll apply, right?" she pressed. "They need people who will actually speak up, not just go along with whatever the administration wants to hear." Michael caught his brother's eye, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll think about it," he promised, his tone making it clear that the consideration would be genuine. Later that evening, as they recounted the day's developments to their mother over dinner, Dr. Hudson listened with a thoughtful expression, her surgeon's hands steepled before her as she absorbed each detail. "It sounds like you've instigated quite a wave of changes," she observed when they had finished. "How do you feel about that?" The twins considered the question seriously, each taking time to formulate his response. "It's strange," Michael said finally. "We didn't go to Westfield intending to be agents of change. We just wanted to get a good education to be treated fairly. But now that things are changing," Marcus continued, "I find myself wanting to be part of shaping that change. Making sure it's meaningful, not just superficial adjustments that let the school claim progress without actually transforming the culture." Dr. Hudson nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That's often how meaningful change happens, not through grand gestures or revolutionary acts, but through the cumulative effect of individuals standing their ground, asserting their right to exist fully in spaces that weren't designed for them." She reached across the table, placing one hand over each of her sons. "I am immensely proud of you both, not just for defending yourselves when necessary, but for the wisdom you've shown in the aftermath. That's the true test of character." The moment was interrupted by the chime of Marcus's phone, a text message notification breaking the contemplative atmosphere. He glanced at the screen, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "It's from Connor," he said, looking up at his brother and mother. "He wants to know if we can meet him at the library tomorrow after school. Says he has something important to discuss." The unexpected request prompted a family conference that extended well past the dinner hour, weighing potential motivations and scenarios. In the end, curiosity won out over caution, and the twins agreed to the meeting, though with the prudent precaution of choosing a public location with plenty of witnesses. The following day, after school, they found Connor waiting for them at a table in the back corner of Westfield's impressive library, a stack of books and folders arranged neatly before him. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with a pen as they approached. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." The twins sat down, their posture relaxed but alert, their expressions carefully neutral. "You said it was important," Marcus replied simply. Connor nodded, setting down the pen and straightening in his seat with visible effort. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, the words coming with evident difficulty. "About Westfield. About the kind of place it is, the kind of place it could be." He opened one of the folders, revealing what appeared to be printouts of student demographic data, institutional mission statements, and comparative analyses of similar private schools. "Did you know that Westfield has the lowest diversity rate of any top-tier prep school in the Northeast, and the highest tuition?" This was not at all what the twins had expected from this meeting. Michael leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued despite his lingering wariness. Why are you showing us this? Connor's expression was complicated, a mixture of determination and discomfort. Because I want to apply for that new committee they're forming, and I want your support. The silence that followed this declaration was profound, filled with the weight of their shared history and the improbability of what Connor was proposing. Your support, Marcus repeated carefully, for you to be on a diversity and inclusion committee. Connor flushed slightly but held his ground. Look, I know how it sounds. After everything that's happened, I'm the last person you'd expect to care about this stuff. And I get that. I get why you'd be skeptical. He pushed the folder across the table toward them. But the thing is, Westfield is never going to change if it's only people like you pushing for it. It needs people like me, too. People whose families have been part of this institution for generations. People who have the kind of influence that can actually move things forward. He paused, searching for words. My grandfather's name is on the science building. My dad is on the board. That means something here, whether it should or not. And I can use that privilege, to help make real changes. The twins exchanged a long look, their twin connection allowing for a complex conversation to pass between them without words. Finally, Michael turned back to Connor. Why? He asked, the single word encompassing all the unasked questions about Connor's motivation, his sudden interest in institutional reform, his apparent change of heart. Connor's response was unexpectedly candid. Partly because of what happened between us, he admitted. I've never been challenged like that before. It made me think about a lot of things I've always taken for granted. He gestured vaguely toward the window where the karate dojo would be visible if they could see through several miles of cityscape. And partly because of what I'm learning there, about respect, about earning your position instead of just being given it. He hesitated, then added with painful honesty, and partly because I'm starting to see that the Westfield I've been defending, this exclusive, unchanging institution, isn't sustainable. It needs to evolve, or it's going to become irrelevant. The conversation that followed was tentative at first, then increasingly engaged as Connor shared research he had compiled on diversity initiatives at other elite private schools, on the educational benefits of inclusive environments, on the changing demographics of college admissions and what that meant for prep schools like Westfield. The twins contributed their own perspectives, pointing out blind spots in Connor's analysis, suggesting additional areas for consideration, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, a collaborative energy began to emerge from what had started as a wary exchange. By the time the library was closing, the three had outlined a preliminary proposal for the committee's consideration, a multifaceted approach to institutional change that addressed admissions policies, financial aid structures, curriculum development, and campus culture. This could actually work, Marcus observed as they gathered their materials, a note of surprise evident in his voice. If, and it's a big if, the administration is genuinely committed to making changes. Connor's response was unexpectedly resolute. Then we make them commit, publicly, specifically, with timelines and benchmarks that can be measured. He met each twin's gaze directly. I know my family's influence has been part of the problem, but it can also be part of the solution. As they parted ways at the library entrance, there was an awkward moment where none of them seemed quite sure how to conclude this unprecedented collaboration. Finally, Connor extended his hand, first to Marcus, then to Michael. Thank you, he said simply, for listening, for giving me a chance to be different than I was. The twins accepted the handshake, their responses measured but sincere. It wasn't friendship, wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement of growth, of possibility, of the potential for meaningful change in even the most entrenched systems. And as they watched Connor walk toward the parking lot where his expensive car waited, they found themselves cautiously optimistic about the path forward. The following weeks saw a flurry of activity as the committee application process unfolded. The The twins decided that Michael would apply, while Marcus focused on organizing student support for the initiatives they hoped to propose. Connor, true to his word, leveraged his considerable social capital to generate interest among segments of the student body that might otherwise have remained disengaged. What emerged was a coalition of students from diverse backgrounds, united by a shared vision of a more inclusive and equitable Westfield. When the committee appointments were announced in early November, both Michael and Connor were among the 6 students selected, along with Sophia, a junior named Darius Williams, and 2 seniors with strong academic records and reputations for thoughtful engagement. The faculty representatives included Mr. Delaney, 3 department chairs, and 2 younger teachers known for innovative approaches to education. Their first meeting, held in the boardroom typically reserved for trustee gatherings, was both productive and provocative. Initial wariness gave way to substantive discussion as the group established priorities and working methods. Principal Hammond, present as an ex officio member, seemed genuinely surprised by the level of preparation and seriousness the students brought to the table. By the meeting's end, 3 subcommittees had been formed, each tasked with developing specific proposals in their area of focus: curriculum and pedagogy, institutional policy, and campus culture. The momentum continued to build through November and into December. The committee's work became a frequent topic of conversation among students and faculty alike, with periodic updates shared through official school communications. What had begun as a response to a specific incident, the confrontation between the twins and Connor's group, had evolved into a broader movement for institutional self-examination and reform, and through it all, the unexpected alliance between the Hudson twins and Connor Wells remained at the center, a visible symbol of the potential for meaningful reconciliation and growth. The final committee meeting before winter break was held on a snowy December afternoon, the boardroom windows showcasing a winter wonderland that lent a certain gravity to their proceedings. The 3 subcommittees presented their preliminary recommendations, each building on months of research, consultation, and careful consideration of Westfield's specific context and challenges. Michael, as chair of the Institutional Policy Subcommittee, outlined proposals for expanded financial aid, revised admissions criteria that emphasized diverse forms of merit, and a new orientation program designed to foster inclusion from students' first days on campus. Connor, representing campus culture, presented recommendations for restructuring student organizations, creating mentorship programs that specifically supported underrepresented students, and establishing clear protocols for addressing instances of bias or discrimination. The Curriculum Subcommittee, led by Mr. Delaney with Sophia as student representative, proposed comprehensive revisions to course offerings and teaching approaches, emphasizing multiple perspectives, critical analysis of historical narratives, and engagement with contemporary social issues. As the meeting concluded, Principal Hammond addressed the group with uncharacteristic emotion. "I want to thank all of you for your exceptional work this semester," he said, his usual administrative reserve softened by genuine appreciation. "What you have accomplished here goes beyond specific policy recommendations. You have demonstrated what Westfield can be at its best: thoughtful, principled, committed to growth and positive change." He looked around the table, his gaze lingering briefly on Michael and Connor. "I will be presenting your recommendations to the Board of Trustees at their January meeting, with my strong endorsement for implementation beginning next academic year." The room erupted in spontaneous applause, the collective effort of months finally crystallizing into tangible progress. As the group dispersed, Michael found Connor waiting for him near the door, a contemplative expression on his face. "Did you ever imagine back in September that we'd end up here?" Connor asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass the boardroom, the committee, the entire improbable scenario they found themselves in. Michael shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "Not even close. If someone had told me then that we'd be working together to change Westfield, I'd have thought they were delusional." Connor's laugh was brief but genuine. "Life is strange sometimes." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I've been thinking about that day in the hallway, the day everything changed. I was so sure I knew exactly who you and your brother were, exactly what your place was supposed to be here. I had this whole narrative constructed in my head before you even arrived, and nothing you did or said was going to change that. Until we showed you that your narrative was wrong," Michael finished for him. "Until we forced you to see us as we actually are, not as you imagined us to be." Connor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It shouldn't have taken that. That's what I keep coming back to. Why did it take a physical confrontation for me to start questioning things I should have questioned years ago?" Michael considered this, recognizing the genuine self-reflection behind the question. "Sometimes we need a shock to break us out of established patterns," he said finally. "For you, it was discovering that we weren't who you thought we were. For Westfield, it was realizing that the old way of doing things wasn't sustainable anymore." As they walked together toward the exit, Connor added, "Your brother waiting for you?" "Yeah, we're heading to the dojo after this. Sensei's holding a special winter solstice training session." Connor nodded, his own participation in karate having become a regular committed practice over the past months. "Tell him I said hi, and that I'll see him at tomorrow's class." "Will do." At the door, they exchanged a brief handshake that had evolved from formal to familiar over their weeks of collaboration. It wasn't quite friendship, too much history lay between them for that, but it was a relationship built on growing mutual respect and a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. As Connor headed for his car and Michael walked toward the east gate where Marcus waited, both carried with them the understanding that they had participated in something significant. Not just a committee or a series of policy recommendations, but the beginning of a fundamental shift in an institution that had remained largely unchanged for generations. And for the Hudson twins, there was the additional satisfaction of knowing that they had stayed true to the principles their mother and their sensei had instilled in them. To stand their ground with dignity, to fight only when necessary, and to use their strength in service of positive change rather than mere self-defense. The winter break passed swiftly. 2 weeks of family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and continued training at the dojo. Sensei Takahashi used the quieter period to focus on advanced techniques with his black belt students, pushing the twins to refine their skills while continually emphasizing the mental and spiritual aspects of their art. "Physical technique without philosophical understanding is empty," he reminded them repeatedly. "True karate lives in the mind and heart as much as in the body." When they returned to Westfield in early January, the campus seemed subtly altered, as if the physical space itself had absorbed something of the changing institutional energy. The halls felt more open, the interactions between students more fluid, less constrained by rigid social hierarchies. It was nothing dramatic, nothing that would be immediately apparent to a casual observer, but to those who had experienced the Westfield of 4 months ago, the shift was unmistakable. The first major test of these changes came with the Board of Trustees meeting in mid-January, where Principal Hammond presented the committee's recommendations for institutional reform. The twins, along with Connor and the other student representatives, were invited to attend the first portion of the meeting, an unprecedented inclusion that signaled the seriousness with which their work was being considered. The boardroom was imposing, its walls lined with portraits of former headmasters and distinguished alumni, its massive oak table dominating the space. The trustees, 12 men and 5 women, most in their 50s or older, all exuding an air of substantial wealth and influence, regarded the students with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to openly supportive. Among them sat Richard Wells, Connor's father, his resemblance to his son evident in his features, if not in his demeanor, which was considerably more reserved. Principal Hammond's presentation was comprehensive and persuasive, laying out the committee's findings and recommendations with clarity and conviction. As he concluded, he invited questions from the trustees, bracing visibly for potential resistance to what were, after all, significant departures from Westfield's traditional approaches. The first question came from Elaine Blackwood, a sharp-featured woman whose family had been associated with Westfield for 4 generations. "These are extensive changes you're proposing," she observed, her tone neutral. "What evidence do we have that they will enhance rather than detract from Westfield's academic excellence? Our primary mission, after all, is to prepare students for admission to top-tier universities." Before Hammond could respond, Connor spoke up, his voice steady. "If I may, Ms. Blackwood, our research actually indicates that greater diversity and inclusion correlate positively with academic outcomes. Students exposed to multiple perspectives and teaching approaches show higher levels of critical thinking, problem-solving abilities, and adaptability, all qualities that top universities increasingly value." He proceeded to cite specific studies and examples, his command of the material impressive enough that even the most skeptical trustees appeared engaged. Other questions followed, about costs, implementation timelines, potential resistance from alumni, and long-term institutional vision. The student representatives handled each with remarkable poise, demonstrating a depth of thought and preparation that gradually shifted the room's energy from cautious consideration to active engagement. But it was Michael's response to a question from Richard Wells himself that seemed to mark a turning point in the discussion. "These proposals represent a significant departure from traditions that have served Westfield well for generations," Wells noted, his gaze moving deliberately from his son to Michael. "How can we be confident that they won't fundamentally alter the character of the institution in ways we might later regret?" Michael met his gaze steadily, neither intimidated nor confrontational. "With respect, Mr. Wells, I believe the question isn't whether Westfield will change. Change is inevitable for any institution that intends to remain relevant in a rapidly evolving society. The question is whether we will guide that change deliberately, in accordance with our highest values and aspirations, or whether we will allow external pressures to force changes upon us in ways we haven't prepared for." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The character of Westfield at its best has always been about excellence, about preparing students to lead meaningful lives and make significant contributions. These proposals don't seek to diminish that character, but to ensure that it remains accessible to all students with the potential to embody it, regardless of background or circumstance." A thoughtful silence followed, broken finally by Elaine Blackwood's measured voice. "Well said, Mr. Hudson. I believe we have much to consider here." The students were thanked for their contributions and dismissed from the remainder of the meeting, leaving the trustees to deliberate in private. As they walked away from the boardroom, Connor fell into step beside the twins, a tentative smile playing at his lips. "I think that went better than expected," he observed. "Ms. Blackwood doesn't impress easily, and you definitely got her attention, Michael." Michael nodded, still processing the experience. "Your father seemed less convinced." Connor's expression tightened slightly. "He's cautious about change. Always has been, but he's also pragmatic. If he can be convinced that these changes will strengthen Westfield in the long run, he'll support them." "And will he be convinced?" Marcus asked, speaking up for the first time since they'd left the boardroom. Connor considered this, his pace slowing as he thought. "I think so," he said finally. "We've made a compelling case. And honestly, I think he was impressed by how you handled his question, Michael. He respects directness, even when he disagrees with the content. The following week brought the news they had been hoping for. The board had approved the committee's recommendations with a few minor modifications and a phased implementation plan beginning in the next academic semester. The announcement was made at a special assembly, Principal Hammond presenting the decision with evident satisfaction and calling the student representatives to the stage for recognition. As the twins stood before the assembled student body, they felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride in what they had accomplished, hope for the changes to come, and a deep sense of vindication that transcended their personal experience. This moment represented not just their own resilience in the face of prejudice, but the possibility of creating lasting change for those who would follow them through Westfield's gates. After the assembly, as students dispersed to their classes, Dr. Hudson was waiting in the main hallway, having taken time from her demanding surgical schedule to attend the announcement. Her eyes shone with pride as she embraced her sons. "This is what courage looks like," she told them softly. "Not just standing up for yourselves, but working to ensure that others won't have to fight the same battles." Later that day, as they changed for karate practice, Marcus voiced a thought that had been forming since the assembly. "You know what's strange? In September, all we wanted was to be left alone, to be allowed to get our education without constant harassment. Now we're at the center of transforming the entire school." Michael nodded, understanding exactly what his brother meant. "It's like what Sensei always says about how karate begins and ends with respect. We demanded respect for ourselves, but in the process, we opened up a conversation about respect for everyone at Westfield." At the dojo that afternoon, they found Connor already there, warming up with the focused intensity he had developed over his months of training. He acknowledged them with a brief nod, then returned to his exercises, the three of them sharing the space with the comfortable familiarity of a relationship that had evolved far beyond its contentious beginnings. Sensei Takahashi, observing them from across the dojo, approached with his characteristic measured step. "I have been thinking," he said without preamble, "about the concept of shiko, execution or implementation. In karate, as in life, understanding principles is only the beginning. The true test comes in how we apply those principles in the world." He looked at each of the three students in turn, his gaze penetrating yet kind. "You have initiated change at your school. Now comes the harder work of ensuring that this change takes root, grows strong, and bears fruit for many seasons to come." He turned to Connor specifically. "This will require particular courage from you, Wells' son. To stand for new principles when old privileges may be threatened, to speak truth to those who have long been comfortable with certain silences." Connor's response was immediate and sincere. "Hi, Sensei. I understand." Takahashi nodded once, acknowledging the commitment behind the words. Then, with a slight shift in demeanor that signaled the end of the philosophical discussion and the beginning of practical training, he called all students to attention for the start of class. As the twins moved to their positions, they exchanged a brief look that contained volumes of shared understanding. They had come to Westfield seeking education, but had found themselves becoming educators in turn, teaching lessons about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand firm in the face of injustice. What had begun with a confrontation in an empty hallway had expanded into a movement for institutional change that would reshape their school for years to come. And through it all, they had remained true to the principles their mother and their sensei had instilled in them, to fight only when necessary, to win without diminishing their opponents, and to use their strength in service of something larger than themselves. In the months that followed, Westfield Academy began its slow but steady transformation. New admission policies were implemented, curriculum revisions introduced, and campus culture initiatives launched. The changes weren't always smooth. There was resistance from some quarters, setbacks and adjustments needed along the way. But the momentum continued, driven by a coalition of students and faculty who remained committed to the vision of a more inclusive and equitable institution. The Hudson twins remained at the center of these efforts, not as confrontational activists, but as thoughtful advocates, using their growing influence to bridge divides and build consensus. Their academic excellence, athletic achievements in the school's newly formed karate team, which they had helped establish with Sensei Takahashi's guidance, and evident integrity earned them respect across the Westfield community. Even those who had initially viewed them with suspicion or hostility found it increasingly difficult to maintain those positions in the face of their consistent demonstration of character and commitment. Connor, too, continued his evolution from entitled bully to principled leader. The change wasn't instantaneous or without challenges. Old habits and assumptions occasionally reasserted themselves, requiring conscious effort to overcome. But his fundamental trajectory remained positive. His continued training at the dojo provided both discipline and community, a space where he was valued for his efforts rather than his family name, and where the principles of respect and integrity were reinforced daily. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it the renewal of the physical world, Westfield Academy was experiencing its own kind of renewal. A gradual but unmistakable shift toward becoming the kind of institution it had always claimed to be, but had fallen short of in practice. And when Marcus and Michael Hudson walked through the gates each morning, they did so with the confidence of those who had earned their place not just through academic merit, but through the courage to stand firm in their principles and the wisdom to channel conflict into constructive change. On the last day of the school year, as students cleaned out lockers and signed yearbooks with the giddy energy of approaching summer freedom, Principal Hammond called the twins to his office. They found him standing at the window, looking out over the campus with a thoughtful expression. "I wanted to thank you both," he said without turning around, "for what you've brought to Westfield this year. Not just your academic contributions, though those have been exemplary, but the way you've challenged us to live up to our stated values." He turned to face them then, his expression more open than they had ever seen it. It couldn't have been easy, being at the forefront of so much change, bearing the weight of others' expectations and resistance. "I want you to know that I recognize the courage that required." The twins accepted his words with polite nods, appreciating the acknowledgement, while also recognizing its limitations. Hammond had been supportive of the reform efforts once they gained momentum, but his initial reluctance to address the root causes of the problems remained a complicated aspect of their relationship with him. "We're grateful for the opportunity to contribute," Marcus replied diplomatically, "and for the support the administration has provided for the initiatives." Hammond smiled slightly, perhaps recognizing the measured nature of the response. "Your diplomatic skills have developed as much as your advocacy ones," he observed. "That combination will serve you well in whatever paths you choose to pursue." He moved to his desk, picking up 2 envelopes and handing one to each twin. "These are formal invitations to serve on the permanent Student Advisory Council we're establishing next year. The board was unanimous in wanting your continued involvement in guiding Westfield's development." The twins accepted the envelopes with genuine appreciation, recognizing the significance of the invitation. What had begun as a temporary committee in response to a specific incident was being institutionalized as a permanent voice in the school's governance, a structural change that would outlast their individual contributions. "We'd be honored," Michael responded, speaking for both of them. As they left the office, they found Connor waiting in the administrative lobby, his expression suggesting he had received a similar invitation. "Advisory Council?" he asked, noticing the envelopes in their hands. They nodded in confirmation. "You too?" "Apparently," Connor confirmed, "though I'm still not sure I deserve it after everything." He let the sentence trail off, the allusion to his earlier behavior hanging in the air between them. "That's exactly why you deserve it," Marcus said after a moment. because you've demonstrated that people can change, that past mistakes don't have to define future actions. That's a powerful example for others to see. Connor absorbed this assessment with thoughtful silence, then offered a small, genuine smile. From enemies to allies in one school year. Not bad. Not bad at all, Michael agreed, returning the smile. Together, the three walked out into the bright June sunshine, their conversation turning to summer plans and next year's possibilities. As they reached the main gates, they paused, looking back at the imposing facade of Westfield Academy. The building itself hadn't changed, but their relationship to it had transformed completely. What had once seemed like a fortress designed to exclude them had become a space they were actively helping to reshape. A community where they had not just survived, but thrived. "See you at the dojo tomorrow," Connor asked as they prepared to part ways. 4 o'clock as usual, Marcus confirmed. Sensei's planning a special summer solstice training session. With final nods of farewell, they separated, Connor heading toward the parking lot while the twins waited for their mother's car at the pickup area. As they stood side by side in the warm afternoon sun, Marcus turned to his brother with a reflective expression. "Remember what Mom said when she first dropped us off here? Remember who you are." Michael nodded, the memory clear in his mind. "I think we did better than that," he observed. "We helped Westfield remember what it's supposed to be." Their mother's car appeared at that moment, pulling smoothly to the curb where they waited. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave Westfield behind for the summer, both twins carried with them the knowledge that they had accomplished something significant, not just surviving in a hostile environment, but transforming it through the application of principles they had learned long before they ever set foot on campus. They had demonstrated in the most practical way possible that true strength lies not in domination, but in discipline, not in privilege, but in principle, not in exclusion, but in creating spaces where everyone can thrive. And as Dr. Hudson's car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward a summer of continued training and new adventures, they knew that when they returned in the fall, it would be to a Westfield that was one step closer to becoming the institution it had always claimed to be, a place of genuine excellence, opportunity, and respect for all who walked through its gates. Hey everyone, I can't thank you enough for joining me for this powerful story about Marcus and Michael's journey at Westfield Academy. If their story of standing up against prejudice while remaining true to their principles resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any future content. I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts, experiences, and what you learned from this story in the comments section below. Have you ever had to navigate a challenging environment while staying true to your values? Or perhaps you've witnessed positive change happen in your community? Your stories and perspectives are what make this channel special, so please share them with all of us. Remember, true strength comes from discipline, integrity, and the courage to stand for what's right. Lessons we can all apply in our daily lives. I'll be back next week with another powerful story that I promise will inspire you just as much. Until then, take care and remember to approach life's challenges with the wisdom of a true warrior.